Hello, and welcome to this three-part series to my amazing podcast with Tom Bainbridge. And in this, I broke it up into some easy-to-listen sections, where the first part of it, we are talking about ice baths, cold exposure, heat exposure, coffee, and all of the BS we hear about coffee. And then we will go into talking about more things to do with MPS and if that's all you need to build muscle, and also other things around if we don't go, it doesn't mean that nothing's working. Hello, and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today, I am joined by Tom with the most amazing accent to actually whip away some buffoonery, because it's always done better when someone has an accent from like Ireland or Scotland or Wales or the UK, just because it sounds a lot more wankery, which is just typical. So here's Tom, and we're actually... let's have you introduce yourself by talking about the absolute absurdity of shit that we see out there, starting with cold baths, actually, because that's got a lot of hype lately. Ice baths and cold exposure, because increases fat burning, or it increases all the crap that they say. What do they say about ice baths? What's true? What's false? And what is a better way to actually get the gains that people think they're getting from ice baths?
Absolutely. So, hey, Ruby. So my accent's like, so I'm from the northeast of England. So I'm about an hour and a half away from the Scottish border. So I have I'm from Durham specifically. So this area was everyone worked in the mines. So they had their own accent called Pitmatic. And like a little bit of that's leached into my accent. But yeah, it's a mishmash. I don't have a proper Durham accent. Anyway, so yeah, ice bath.
Called the anti-wankery accent.
Yeah, the anti-wankery accent. Very nice. Wanker does sound good in my accent, I will say. Alright, so yeah. So the ice baths things, it's been around for ages. It's been repopularized primarily by Huberman, so far as I'm aware. But it's been something that people have spoken about for a really long time. And I only know that because I remember writing a blog about it in like 2010, telling people not to do ice baths. And my position on this hasn't changed. So whenever people talk about ice baths and the benefits therein, there are kind of like three branches of stuff that people say. It's either that it helps your exercise recovery, it helps you burn fat, or there's just this kind of like nebulous health benefit, which probably breaks further down into like there's a big surge of hormones after an ice bath, or something to do with the immune system. And some of these things stand up to scrutiny a little bit more than others. Looking at fat burning first, because I think that's the one that people talk about the most, there's essentially two studies on this. So Huberman posted about both of these quite regularly. These are like the two most common citations. The first one was Soberg et al. From 2021, I think it was. But basically what Soberman and colleagues did was this. They took a bunch of people in, I want to say Norway, who swim regularly in iced water. Because that's the thing you do in really cold ass places. You go swimming in the ice. There's nothing better to do. So they took 8 people that take these regular ice swims. I think that's where this 11-minute per week recommendation that Huberman gives comes from. So he recommends you ice bath for 11 minutes a week. I want to say that's what they did on average. And they compared them to 7 control people. So this is a 15-person study, which is already a problem. But you take these people and you put them in a blanket, and the blanket can heat up and cool down. So you put them in a warm blanket for 45 minutes, then it goes really cold for 45 minutes, and then it's warm for 45 minutes, and then you measure a bunch of stuff. So what we're seeing here is the difference between people who are regularly exposed to cold and people who aren't regularly exposed to cold when they are then exposed to cold, if that makes sense. And like the headline result was that once you've been exposed to cold, it increases your metabolic rate a bit for the rest of the day. If you're not regularly exposed to cold, the increase you get is on average about 18 calories per hour, which is not huge. I think you'll agree, but it's also not nothing. Like if you math that out over 24 hours, it's like 400 and something calories, which is not horrendous. If you're regularly exposed to cold, though, it about doubles. So they got an increase of about 40 calories per hour. So what we're talking about here is if you are exposed to cold for 45 minutes, if you regularly do ice baths, you get an increase in your metabolic rate that's equivalent to walking really slowly for a while. Like, this is not nothing, but it's basically nothing. Like, this is not the groundbreaking result that people talk about. This is not going to make a significant difference. If you're just like active during the day, then you're going to get basically the same benefit. The other side of it,
and the lazy man's walking.
Yeah, the other problem is, though, any increase in your metabolic rate is going to have other downstream effects. None of these things happen in isolation. And so if you're doing something that is going to increase your metabolic rate, that is almost certainly going to increase your appetite as well. Like, it's very, very difficult for that not to be the case. Because your body doesn't want to lose weight. We all know this. We've talked about this for ages. Whenever you're in a calorie deficit, your body does a bunch of adaptations to make you more hungry, to make you pay attention to food more, to make you move around a bit less. And there's no reason to assume that cold exposure wouldn't have those same effects. We've all seen the tendency that people have to eat a little bit more in the winter when it's cold. It's difficult to say that these things aren't going to be related. I don't have hard evidence of that, but that would be a major suspicion that I had. This study also had other problems. So like the people who do the regular cold swimming I think they had like 50% less body fat than the people who didn't do the regular swimming. So the controlling was a bit weird. But anyway, so that's one of the studies, and you can already tell it's a bit shit and the results weren't that impressive. The other study that people talk about is a recent military study, which was just terrible to begin with. So they took these military personnel and they gave some of them ice baths for a certain amount of time every day, and they gave some of them nothing. But they didn't then compare these two groups. You got the people who got ice baths, they did the process and they compared their body fat before and after the ice bath process, but they didn't then compare that to the control group, which is a really weird way to do a study. That's the purpose of a control group. Usually when you do research, you do an experiment and you compare the outcomes of that experiment to if you hadn't done the intervention. So if I wanted to test a supplement and see if it makes you stronger, what I would do is I would get a bunch of people, I'd give half of them supplement, wouldn't give the other half anything. Then I'd match them for the training process that they went through over a given period of time. And then I would compare how much strength both group gained. And it's like, right, okay, if the supplement group gained more strength, the supplement might have helped. That's generally how you do a controlled experiment, right? This is the equivalent of, I take two groups of people, both of them do the same strength program. I give half of them a supplement, and then say, oh, the supplement people got stronger over time. I'm not going to compare them to the other people, but they got stronger over time, therefore the supplement works. Like, it's just a really silly way of doing things. And all of the evidence for fat loss in humans based on cold exposure hinges on these two experiments. It's just, the evidence just isn't there.
Here's a funny thing. Two stupid studies, like they're honestly really ridiculous if you think about it in the real context of things, because it's not done in the real world environment. But if you actually take the numbers that Tom just said, and you think about the last two podcasts that I released with Gab Fundero, something that has a greater magnitude is your choice of food intake. It like about triple what Tom said. If you choose less processed food, if you choose more whole foods, more veggies, and then if you want to even double that, if you eat more protein in your diet, there's a higher thermic effect of food. The thermic effect of food has a greater difference than sitting yourself in an ice cold bath and hating life for the 11 minutes that you need to sit in some disgustingly cold water for. Now, I never really heard of the fat burning difference until recently. Where I see people come up with it is, oh, it's the best way to start your day because it's going to boost your cortisol, or it's going to make you more resilient to stress. Freaking stub your toe or accidentally burn yourself on a pan and you can do the same thing. Like, just do a hard exercise session in the morning and you can regulate your cortisol that way. But there are certain cases, like I have one girl at the moment who needs to actually get a little bit of that buzz in the morning because she doesn't have it, that is doing a cold shower for 30 seconds but it is not for stress resilience. It is literally just something that I would only recommend to her. So maybe you can elaborate on that bit a little bit longer before we kind of merge that into the same argument around freedom coffee.
Oh, 100%. So these are the other two main benefits that people talk about. Is like the nebulous health thing, and then there's the exercise recovery, which we'll come to right at the end. So the nebulous health thing, it usually hinges around the hormone boosts. So it's like, oh, if you jump in cold water, then it increases cold shock proteins, or it increases cortisol resilience, or it increases dopamine. And exactly as you just said, that's because it creates a stress response. Like, creating small amounts of stress response is important. It's a good thing. I think the term's hormesis, which is where you like expose yourself to small amounts of stress and you become more resilient to that stress. But exactly as you said, that's what exercise does. That's what exercise is for. And this point here kind of goes broadly around a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today. I'm extremely hesitant to just accept on face value that these effects stack. So I don't know if you've ever played like a Dungeons and Dragons type thing, right? But one of the things you get in D&D based stuff is that effects don't stack. So if you wear a certain armor and you get like an effect from that, like, oh, it boosts your resilience to whatever. If you get a ring that also boosts resilience to whatever, you're not allowed to stack those two. You have to pick one of the two. And I don't know that it is the case that a person who exercises regularly and gets the hormesis effect from that and gets the dopamine and adrenaline and all of that from that, if you exercise in the morning, I don't know that if you take an ice bath, you get an additional benefit. And I would imagine you probably don't. So it kind of feels like it doesn't have to be one or the other. I just don't know that if you're already a healthy person who's exercising regularly, if the hormone boosts that you get from these ice baths are actually going to do anything.
Also, if you think about it, any time that we put a stress on our body, the goal is usually to get a certain adaptation. And training, you're chasing adaptations that you want, like building muscle, building strength, building your capacity to train harder, to do more. What the fuck are you trying to build getting into an ice bath? The ability to stay in there for another 30 minutes and waste 30 minutes of your life instead of 2 seconds? Like, why adaptate? Like, it's...
Well, yeah, I mean, that's basically what they found in that first study that I said about the Danish or Norwegian or whatever ice swimmers. They were just well adapted to being cold. Now, unless you're going to be cold in real life, it's kind of like training for something that you're just... I don't know. It's like training to be better at putting your hand on a hot stove. Like, right, cool, but you could just not do that and you'd be fine. I mean, and then we can link that into... So, yeah, fat loss benefits, basically non-existent. Health benefits probably do exist to an extent, but all of the health benefits that you're getting from ice baths comes from the fact that it's exposure to stress, and you're already exposing yourself to stress if you're exercising regularly. And I don't know if you get additional benefit.
I want to add the health benefits that people purport to get from cold exposure. I would say you get even more from putting yourself into a sauna, because you get a lot of cardiovascular benefits from the heat exposure. And at the same time, you're promoting more recovery in a well-adaptive way. Exactly, this has been going on for ages. Now that you say that, I remember back in ages ago, I was studying the fact that ice baths actually attenuate muscle synthesis. Like, you will not get the gains you think you're going to get. And even explosive power, if you're training for explosive power in explosive sports, power development and muscle development are blunted once you expose that to cold. But when you expose it to heat, you're actually helping the process of healing in a way that you're going to still get those adaptations, plus the health benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked into the heat exposure thing. So that is a big, I don't know. And I'm not commenting further on that because I literally don't know.
That was something I actually experimented on for myself. So I do want to add that it did actually lower my blood pressure quite a bit over doing it consistently twice a week for a good, I only actually looked at my results a month apart. So I would say it is really good for blood pressure, and you can start to tolerate it a lot more, which actually made me less heated while I was training, so I was able to train harder. Whereas usually I get really hot and bothered during my session and I can't push as hard. But doing that exposure allowed me to adapt to that heat that I get through my training. So I'll let you take over, but I just wanted to add that in.
No, that's really cool. So what kind of protocol did you use? Because I say I've not looked into this at all.
So I did 2 times 35 minutes, and it was 60 to 70 degrees Celsius in the sauna. So I did that twice a week. There was 1 week where I did it 3 times a week. And that over that whole 4 weeks, my blood pressure dropped from, I don't know how it got so high, but it dropped from 136 over 79 or something to then 112, I think. So it was really good. And my heart rate went back to the lowness that it used to be, because my resting heart rate's usually around 40, but it was sitting around 50 for quite a while before then. So then I went back to my usual. So it was like, cool. I didn't actually think it would do anything until I experimented it for myself, and then I looked into it more, and now I'm like, yeah, this is really good for heart health.
That's really cool. I like that a lot. And I've got to say, I can imagine that being in a sauna is more pleasant than an ice bath. Though I will say, and ice bath people, don't get too annoyed. If you enjoy an ice bath, like, fine, I don't care. I'm not saying don't do them necessarily, though I might say not to do them in a second. I'm just saying, if you're not doing them, like, you're not missing out on anything. I like going from a sauna into an ice plunge at a spa as much as everybody else does. that's a normal part of the human experience, but I wouldn't sit in a ice-filled wheelie bin in my garden, is all I'm saying. But I mean, in terms of the exercise thing, exactly as you've said, we've had evidence for a really long time that cold exposure, like extreme cold exposure, like ice baths, it improves your recovery from training. But the way it does that is by blunting the inflammatory response that is necessary for adaptation from training. So that means that it does have you some utility. Let's say you're competing in a sport where you're going to have 3 competitions in a week, or I don't know, maybe you play football or soccer for non-UK people, and it's coming towards the end of the season, and you've got a bunch of cup games, and you need to play 4 times across 2 weeks. At that point, the adaptations from training aren't really important. You just need to be able to perform and then be ready to perform again. And so in that kind of instance, there's probably utility for ice baths. So like for athletes, if you're competing at the Olympics and you've got to do a bunch of competitions over a bunch of days, again, you're not looking for adaptations. You've already got them. You're adapted. You just want to be able to recover and do it again. But if you're looking to recover from a training session that was designed to create an adaptation, the stuff that ice baths block is really important for getting that adaptation. And so it's completely self-defeating. To my understanding, the effects are less for strength accrual, because you develop strength in a slightly different way than you develop additional muscle mass. It's kind of 2 different related, but not exactly the same mechanisms. But yeah, if you're looking to build muscle and you're sore, so you get in an ice bath, it's a bad move. And so if you're overall looking for hypertrophy, I probably wouldn't ice bath very often.
Yeah, see, if you really hate cold exposure, something that I only, at the moment, only have 2 athletes that I coach, and when they're in their close to competing or actually event races, I just load them up on tart cherry and beetroot juice and friggin' vitamin C, which we know is not really good for actually getting adaptations, because it's an antioxidant, so it can blunt it the same way that an ice bath does without the discomfort.
To my understanding, the mechanism that vitamin C and antioxidants and stuff like that, especially dietary ones, affect inflammation is different. So if you take like an ice bath or an anti-inflammatory medication, they blunt the immune response. They prevent it happening. Whereas if you take a high antioxidant load diet, and the mechanism for this isn't that well known. It could be to do with reduced concentration, or it could be to do with the food matrix or something. But what you see is that inflammation dies off quicker, but it seems like the body's basically regulating it better, as opposed to it being blunted with like a blunt force object. As far as I know, high antioxidant supplements do blunt it, but just a high antioxidant diet doesn't. So again, it's probably something to do with concentration. You can get a lot more antioxidants in a supplement than you can get in like some oranges. But yeah, so a high antioxidant diet is not a bad thing. An anti-inflammatory rich diet, which again is just a Mediterranean style diet, really, you don't have to pick any special foods. That is a good idea. But anything that actively blocks that inflammation is probably not the move if you're looking to adapt. Though, as we've said, if you're looking for competition, you're not looking to adapt. You just need to get your shit together so you can do it again.
Again, specific protocols for every single case, which is why the best advice can be the worst advice for you in the wrong circumstance. Now, with this stupid, we have ranted on about this so many times, and the amount of times that I put it onto my Facebook to only get people butthurt because Huberman says, drink water before you drink coffee. Wait an hour or 2 or 3 before you drink coffee. Just don't have coffee in the morning. Eat food. Can we please put this bullshit to rest?
Right. So I would put this advice in the same category as don't eat carbs after 8 p.m. Right? It is an entirely arbitrary thing that you don't have to do, but people who do it will probably get better outcomes because of other reasons. So if you don't eat carbs after 8 p.m., you'll probably lose fat. And the reason for that is because the carbs that you eat after 8 p.m. are usually in the form of like crisps or chips and ice cream and pizza and all of these lovely things that put you in a calorie surplus. And if you just have a hard rule where you don't eat carbs after 8 o'clock, what that can do is it can take away a lot of the decisions that people make, and it can correlate with better food choices. Like I have clients now who don't eat after 7 p.m. Not because that's a magic cutoff and calories after that are stored differently, but because the food they eat after 7 p.m. is shit. It puts them in a calorie surplus. And for that specific person, that self-imposed rule, they decided, right, I'm just not going to eat after 7 p.m. That has helped them to regulate their calorie intake. So the Huberman coffee in the morning thing. He suggests a couple of reasons for this. One of them is to do with the mechanism of action that one of the mechanism of actions that caffeine has, which to my understanding is just like he's kind of got some theories and then just ran with it, which is a broad thing that the biohacky people tend to do. You take some mechanisms and then you assume an outcome based on those mechanisms. So one of the ways that caffeine works is it blocks adenosine receptors. So we've all heard of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. It's the energy currency of the body. Whenever your body wants to do anything, it uses this thing called ATP, which is an adenosine with a chain of 3 things attached to it. You break off one of those things, that releases energy, that allows your body to do something, whether that is contract a muscle or make a protein or move an enzyme somewhere. ATP is involved in that. And then when you eat food, especially glucose and fatty acids, what your body does with that through the energy systems is makes ATP again. Nutrition serves to recycle ATP, if you look at it from a really oversimplified manner. So during the day, your brain is doing a bunch of stuff, and that stuff breaks up these ATP, and eventually you end up with a bunch of free adenosine. That free adenosine is therefore a marker of brain activity. As your brain does more stuff, it produces more adenosine. Adenosine can then bind to adenosine receptors in the brain, and this creates something called sleep pressure. So one of the ways that sleep is regulated is during the day, brain activity is quite high, and so you produce adenosine quite quickly, faster than your brain can clear it out. And so during the day, adenosine builds up and up and up and up and up, binds onto adenosine receptors more and more. This creates sleep pressure, it makes you want to go to sleep. Then during the night, brain activity is still going on, but it's reduced in comparison to during the day. And that means that the adenosine production rate falls below the adenosine clearance rate. You clear out adenosine during the night, and that's why you wake up refreshed in the morning. So that's one of the 2 ways that your body regulates sleep. The other way is circadian rhythm. So caffeine works to block adenosine receptors. It can basically mask tiredness by preventing the thing that creates sleep pressure from creating that sleep pressure. The problem is, once the caffeine is metabolized, the adenosine receptors are free again, and that adenosine hasn't gone anywhere. So the adenosine is all just going to flood the receptors, and you feel really tired, and that's what like a caffeine crash is. So all delaying your coffee intake will do is it will mean that you block adenosine receptors later, and you get a caffeine crash later. That's functionally all it'll do. And so one of the things that Huberman says is when you wake up in the morning, you get a big release of cortisol. Cortisol wakes you up. It's important. That's what it's supposed to do. And if you have caffeine, that creates a bit of a stress response. So that affects the cortisol release. And then also you get an early caffeine crash. And so if you delay your coffee, you allow your body's natural cortisol levels to work, and then you block adenosine receptors later, meaning that it works a bit better. And that is just shit he made up. Like he just made that up. To my understanding, there's no evidence that caffeine significantly disrupts that cortisol release in the body to the point that it makes a difference. And that's always the question that we need to ask. We don't need to ask, does it disrupt the cortisol release? We need to ask, okay, it disrupts the cortisol release, so what? And that question, to my understanding, hasn't been answered. But one thing that delaying your coffee by 90 minutes can do is it can make you feel like an absolute bag of shit in the morning. So you can realize, oh, I probably need to sleep more. And so in kind of a roundabout way, what delaying your coffee in the morning can do is it can prevent you from blocking the tiredness that you would have felt if you had available adenosine receptors in the morning. So if you're waking up and you've still got this buildup of adenosine because you've underslept, what caffeine can do is it can prevent you from realizing that. And then that being underslept can have negative effects on your health and well-being that caffeine facilitates. So if you delay your coffee, what that can make you do is think, oh God, I felt so tired this morning, when you actually might not have realized had you had coffee when you first wake up. So you might sort it out. You might improve your sleep hygiene. That improved sleep hygiene means you wake up feeling more energized in the morning anyway, because you actually feel rested. Then you can delay your coffee. And so downstream, delaying your coffee might have good effects. Or you can just fix your sleep and have coffee in the morning like everybody else. It's might incidentally make behavioral improvements, but doesn't actually mechanistically do anything. It's one of those things.
I hate that I really want to rant on about regarding, because honestly, when it comes to this subject, it really pisses me the hell off, because number one, hydrate before you caffeinate. Bro, coffee is hydrating. It is like coffee in itself. Like if you want to dehydrate yourself, have a caffeine pill. Coffee has water. It is hydrating. Oh, but I pee a lot. Well, no shit. You just drink more water. And all that does is just makes you want to urinate more. But you are literally more hydrated after drinking coffee than you are before you drink the coffee. So you don't need to hydrate before you caffeinate. That's my first rant. The second rant is the whole breakfast, coffee is not breakfast thing. It's like, yeah, so what? You can still have coffee before, because I have coffee pretty much as my first thing of the day, and then I eat a couple of hours later, which is my pre-workout before I train. The reason why coffee instead of food is such a bad idea for some people is because they leave the house as a busy mom, they have their coffee, now they're having some weird sugar crash, sugar craving, because they inherently eat unhealthy as it is. So then they grab some granola bar, maybe some pastries. They don't have time to eat lunch, so then they grab another coffee, and by the end of the day they're gorging the pantry out. And then there are the stressed moms. They have something quick in the morning with some coffee, and then they have something else through the day, if they even have that, or they try to push out lunch, and then all of a sudden they're in Macca's drive-through, or McDonald's for the non-Aussies that like to slang everything, and having crap over there. Like, busy moms, yeah, you like, it would make sense. You need to eat before that first meal. And I would say the first meal is the most important meal of the day for the majority of people. That, like, obviously for us, like, it doesn't really all that matter, but most people cannot eat enough protein in the day. A lot of people do not get enough fruit and veggies in the day. The first meal of the day is the best time to set that up. A lot of the time, people do not understand the way that movement and energy is created and made, whatever. If you just hoard your food for the end of the day, your main activity is during the day. That is when you're going to be burning the most energy. A lot of people have this is like, I had a post that I put up ages ago about having your calorie deficit on paper is not always, a lot of the time, not a calorie deficit at the cellular level, because of these mechanisms that happen that make that calorie deficit number never a deficit, especially if you're highly stressed as well. Because if you're highly stressed, your body's not going to be effectively using its energy and down regulating how much energy actually comes out of the body, despite the fact that you're getting the energy in. So now your calorie deficit that was here is now here. And then if you eat a lot of packaged foods, that calorie deficit is not a calorie deficit anymore, because now you're eating all these packaged foods. Like, there are so many different things that can throw it out. It's got nothing to do with the coffee. That just became its own rant in itself, because I guess it kind of, you can touch on that if you want to touch on that too, but it leads into the next question, which is women going on to like keto, low carb, whatever. They're already really stressed out because they hate their friggin' lives. They hate their bodies. They want to change this. They want to change that. They just have stress in general. Why are carbs super beneficial for highly stressed individuals and women in particular, because thyroid? So two different things there.
So I couldn't agree more with what you were saying about the coffee and breakfast thing. So I've said this to people before. Like, I think the rise of intermittent fasting has been one of the most like negative things for the understanding that people have of how nutrition works. In that, yes, intermittent fasting is possible. Yes, if you skip breakfast and yet account for the calories and the protein and everything, it can work just fine. And intermittent fasting can be a useful way to control your calorie intake and et cetera, et cetera. But it feels as though people were so desperate to promote this idea that breakfast isn't the most important meal of the day, and look how clever I am, look how right I am, that they forgot how behavior works. And in my experience of working with clients, exactly as you said, if my clients aren't eating breakfast, they find it way harder to hit their protein goal. I'm not saying they can't do it, but it's harder. They find it way harder to eat an adequate amount of fiber. They find it way harder to eat 5 to 6 portions of fruits and vegetables per day. Again, it's not to say you can't do it, but it's so much more difficult. And when you factor in the fact that most people struggle to eat well anyway, reducing their opportunities to eat healthily by like a third, it doesn't make it that much easier. And as you say, having coffee as breakfast kind of facilitates that, because it's a warm thing that goes into your stomach, so you feel a little bit of satisfaction, you feel a little bit full. Caffeine can act as an appetite suppressant to an extent. And so it can facilitate the skipping of breakfast, which then just precedes this day of not eating as much as you should do. Now, when it comes to the importance of carbs, the way that I tend to talk about this is not necessarily carb specific. So there are some potential mechanisms wherein a low carb diet can negatively affect women, especially. So it could potentially affect thyroid function, maybe. There's also the link between a moderate consuming carbohydrates, which increases tryptophan in the brain. Tryptophan is a precursor to serotonin. So there's this idea that if you eat lots of carbohydrates, then it increases serotonin. That's not really how that works. For two reasons. One of them, if you eat protein alongside the carbohydrates, that just kind of doesn't happen anymore, which most people aren't eating carbohydrate-only meals, hopefully. Like, that probably wouldn't be a good thing. And the other thing is, just because tryptophan is used to make serotonin, that doesn't mean that if you add a bunch of tryptophan that you necessarily get more serotonin. That's not necessarily how that works. Like, putting more bricks on a building site doesn't make more houses until you've got builders to build them. But if you look at research on low carb and ketogenic diets, there are two broad patterns that you see. There are three broad patterns that you see. One of them, adherence rates are kind of difficult. Carbohydrates are a staple. Well, all staple foods are carbohydrates, pretty much. If you think of staple foods, you're thinking of rice, beans, bread, pasta, like potatoes. Staple foods are carbohydrates. And so the diet that we eat is carbohydrate based. And so avoiding that is just kind of difficult. It sucks. People don't enjoy it. So adherence rates are a bit Now, the other two patterns that you see are if protein and calories are matched between a low carb approach and a high carb approach, the outcomes that you get in terms of body composition are effectively the same. So the most famous example of this that people talk about is there's a wonderful researcher called Kevin Hall. He came from physics rather than nutrition background. So he has a different way of looking at nutrition research.
Yep. I spoke about this one with Alan Aragon actually, and it was in a metabolic. Yeah. It was in a metabolic ward, wasn't it? So yeah. So what I discussed with Alan Aragon was but so what? How does this apply in the real life? Because in reality, the higher carb diet would actually come out on top for body composition. Because what does that lead to? Better training performance, better strength, better energy through the day. You'll be able to use those carbs more. Whereas if you're on I will be talking, we can bring it up now as well. There are it's the right advice for the right people, because there are some people that are more insulin resistant or ones that aren't as insulin sensitive that won't use the carbs as well. But that isn't all about the carbs, because we don't eat carbs, we eat food. And there's, you can eat gummy bears, or you can eat fruit, or you can eat potatoes. There are different carbs on the spectrum, and they all impact you differently. And then if you have carbs with protein, something protein does, the opposite of insulin is glucagon. Something that protein does is that it stimulates the glucagon in the end turn so that it can recirculate that whole glucose system so that it lasts in the system longer. So pretty much what I'm trying to say in dumb terms is that if you're having carbs with protein, yes, you're going to still get the insulin release because protein spikes insulin, but it's going to be more sustained. The best way for you to fix your shit is to get more, I would say actually getting aerobically conditioned and moving your body more, building more muscle, because the carbs can serve you if you use it in the right way. But I just really wanted to say that as well, because it's the carbs can serve a purpose in the real world if you zoom out and ask yourself, okay, so what is it that I want to get the end outcome? I need to improve my training performance. I need to improve my energy through the day. I'm a busy, stressed out mom who's running on freaking blood glucose all the time because my cortisol's through the roof. So how can I actually help this? Okay, let's actually feed it the carbs so then I can have the energy so that I stop getting energy crashes and then eating a whole friggin' crisps packet.
It would be a crisp packet, just to. Chips. So I love that, and this is kind of what I'm laboriously trying to get towards. So what you see in that metabolic ward study is if you've got a diet that's 50% sugar versus a diet that's 5% carbs, fat loss is the same when protein and calories are matched. Wonderful. Okay, that tells us that there's no mechanistic reason to go low carb if you want to lose fat. Delightful. That's a nice thing to know. But what you also see is if you compare a low carb diet to a low fat diet and you don't match carbs and don't match calories and protein, the low carb diet people lose more weight. And the reason for that is because if you cut out an entire macronutrient, you reduce your calorie intake significantly. And what the problem is with that is if you're doing that chronically and you've got a menstrual cycle, this can lead you to some really big problems. So a term that all people in this space should be relatively familiar with is hypothalamic amenorrhea. This is where you lose your menstrual cycle or you experience menstrual cycle disruption because of essentially an excessively low calorie intake or an excessively high exercise load, or both, usually both. And so if you're eating a low carb diet, there's no mechanistic reason to do that as per metabolic ward study. It predisposes you to radical underconsumption and insufficient training fuel, as Ruby just mentioned, because if you're looking to do intense exercise, which I would define as training kind of close to failure, regardless of rep range, which is kind of close to failure, or training with a heart rate of above like 75%, that will be fueled by carbohydrate. It just will, because you need to use fast twitch muscle fibers to do that. So these are your fast twitch type 2A muscle, type 2B muscle fibers. And they can't use fat very efficiently. So if you're on a low carb diet, you can't train as hard, you're predisposed to underconsumption, and it's unnecessary. It just doesn't work. And this is where I wanted to loop that into what we were talking about intermittent fasting and the coffee for breakfast thing, because what you raised there was actually really, really important. If it fits your macros movement of like the early 2010s, where people were like, oh, as long as you hit your protein, carbs, fats, fiber throughout the day, it doesn't matter what you eat, it doesn't matter when you eat. That movement made a really big mistake in that it's kind of shifted everyone's perception of nutrition into this thing that exists in 24-hour cycles. And it doesn't. We all know this. When we're talking about fat loss, you can eat a bit more some days and a bit less some other days, and this leads to the same fat loss as long as it all evens out. And we all know that, but we don't think of it in terms of the other way around. So we all think about, you can think of calorie balance over 7 days, you can think of calorie balance over a month. Wonderful, but let's look at calorie balance over the course of 24 hours. If you're really under eating during the day and then you make up your calories on the night, that can predispose you to overeating. Wonderful. But the other problem that you run into is that means that something called energy availability, which we can get into if you want and talk about what energy availability.
Yeah, I love this conversation. This is what I love.
Cool. So we'll park that. We'll define energy availability in a minute. But if you undereat during the day and match your calories at the night, even if your calorie balance then ends up being theoretically adequate, because you spent so much of your day in a state of low energy availability, evidence suggests this can lead to disruptions in menstrual cycle. So you can end up with these hormonal issues even if you're technically eating enough, because you're not eating enough throughout a bunch of the day. This is especially influential for people who train in the morning. So if you get a coffee, go train, come away, have a little snack, have a small lunch, and then have a big evening meal, this can predispose you to problems. I'm not saying that's going to affect everybody, obviously, but it's not an eating pattern that I would recommend. And eating low carb will lead you towards being more likely to experience that.
Because you're talking about the daytime, I want to emphasize this is exactly what I mean when I say that your metabolism is running on a 1,200 calorie engine. If you are feeding your body that little throughout the week and then overeating or over drinking on weekends, you are just going to be adding extra fat because your body is not in a state to actually use that effectively. It is going to be storing that. Please, 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 if you enjoyed this episode, please go onto your Spotify, onto your iTunes, and give it a 5-star rating. You don't have to leave a review, but it will also make me really happy to just read through those. But just leaving a 5-star review is more than enough. So with that, reach out to either of us if you have any questions. If you enjoyed this episode, share it to your stories, share it to a friend, whatever. Just help me spread the great news, because something I absolutely hate when I listen to podcasts is friggin' ads interrupting it all the time. And that's something you'll never listen to on this one. And you won't hear any promoting on this as well, because all I want to do is bring you good information. With that, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will hear you on the next part.